We turn now to a new battle over history spurred by a new book, Forget the Alamo, which challenges the commonly known narrative around the 1836 Battle of the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. For decades, that battle has been portrayed in popular culture and in school textbooks as a valiant defense by some 200 men killed by an overpowering Mexican army. And even in defeat, the Alamo's defense providing the rallying cry for Texas forces that later won the state's independence. But does that narrative tell the whole story? Bryan Burrough, an author and correspondent for Vanity Fair, joins us now. He's the co-author, along with Jason Stanford and Chris Tomlinson, of the new book, Forget the Alamo, which explores what they say are the misconceptions and myths around the bloody battle. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
So first, we should note that you and your co-authors grew up in Texas, so you've grown up with the story of the Alamo, including the idea that white settlers like Davy Crockett fought to the death to defend the Alamo. First, just quickly explain what context you argue has been left out of the telling of this history, including the role of slavery.
Well, when you look at the myths of the Alamo, and let's be clear, we're building our book on 20 or 30 years of new academic scholarship. The myths fall into two categories. Those about the Texas Revolt itself. And yes, we argue that the main factor, long overlooked, but now dealt with, I think, commonly in the academic literature, was the protection of slavery. Independent Texas became, as you may know, the most militant slave state pretty much in world history. And then, of course, there are the myths about the battle itself. The idea that, the heart of the myth has always been that these men made this stirring defense by choice to defend their freedom from Mexican oppression. The facts of history, however, don't support any of this, including the fact that they did any of this voluntarily. The fact is they fought at the Alamo because they got trapped, because they ignored weeks of warnings that Santa Anna's army was on its way.
And your book has faced some blowback as it comes. We see the battle in many states over the teaching of critical race theory similarly. What do you say to conservative critics who say that slavery was not the central factor in the fight over Texas independence and that the history shouldn't overemphasize its importance in the battle for the Alamo?
The legend of the Alamo is so beloved here. It's so much at the center of Texas identity that it is very hard for traditionalists to give up any of the legend that they've grown up knowing and loving. It's hard to introduce new ideas. And unfortunately, the book has become politicized by Texas politicians who think that banging on us will help them raise some money. This type of thing is to be expected. It's unfortunate. All we're trying to do, Linsey, is recapture the Alamo of history, the actual Alamo, not the Alamo with the legend that we've all grown up loving.
And you also question the military strategy of those who defended the Alamo. But let's step back for a moment. Is that accurate that this small group of men was able to defend their position for 13 days and delay the Mexican advance, and that their deaths provided this rallying cry of remember the Alamo for Sam Houston and the Texas Army, who weeks later defeated Santa Anna's forces to win Texas independence?
Well, the part you got right was they fought, and it was a rallying cry. It was an unnecessary battle. It was one that Sam Houston himself didn't think was necessary. San Antonio had some strategic significance, but there was really no reason for it to be fought. It was an indefensible position. But you're right in that the most important thing about the Alamo was not the loss of the men, the military loss. It was how Sam Houston and the Texas Army 6 weeks later used it as a rallying cry to defeat the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto, which secured Texas's independence. In that regard, the battle was tremendously important, but of little real strategic significance.
The book also outlines how efforts like John Wayne's movie in 1960 about the Alamo have fed the popular narrative about the battle, which you call the, quote, heroic Anglo narrative. So why do you believe that the fuller picture of the battle got lost over time, and was there ever pushback on that narrative?
There was very little pushback really until the 1970s. And as I say, we're incorporating all the academic work for the last 40 years. You know, up until the 50s, the Alamo was kind of a small regional Texas thing. It really wasn't until the Davy Crockett movies that Disney made in the 50s, and especially the John Wayne movie in 1960, that really enshrined the legend and made it not only a national but an international icon. And it took so long for people to push back on this because a lot of accounts of the battle, the few that exist, were from Mexican officers. Many of them have only risen to visibility in the 20th century, and it took a while. And you know, these types of controversies have really been going on since the mid-'70s, when the first controversy arose about the Alamo's greatest mystery, which was how Davy Crockett died. For years, of course, Texans always wanted to believe that he had died as John Wayne did famously in that movie. In fact, we now know from Mexican accounts unanimously that he surrendered and was executed.
But I'm curious also, though, that since Texas has one of the largest Mexican-American populations in the country, especially among young people, how does the way the Alamo story is taught in Texas schools impact that population? Well,
that's the most important part of this. When people say, why does any of this matter? You have to understand how this Anglo-centric narrative of Texas's birth, of the Alamo's birth, has been used to, and I don't use this word lightly, oppress generations of Latino Americans, of Tejanos, as they're often called down here. It is a painful wound. It is something that has been used against them culturally for years. And it is, you know, a lot of people talking Tejanos, especially those of a certain age, who will say you just don't know what it's like to be portrayed as the killers of Davy Crockett, that this revolt was all Alamos against, all Anglos against all Latinos, when in fact it wasn't. The Tejanos were the most important allies that the American colonists had, and it's that type of nuance that has been utterly lost in the Anglo-centric narrative commonly caught in Texas schools, and that we're trying to recapture and reintroduce to mainstream audiences today.
Bryan Burrough, co-author of Forget the Alamo, The Rise and Fall of an American Myth. Our thanks to you. The book is now out and available.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.